Pittsburghers have a connection to the city unlike other places that are transient. People come and go. Here, people stay. They put down roots.
If you're from Pittsburgh, you understand that at some point you are going to go across the bridge, and most likely a tunnel. The tunnels and the bridges define how you get yourself around the city and where you get to and how you get there.
The Fort Pitt Tunnel is right in the heart of the city. It's right at the confluence of the Monongahela and Allegheny River, where they turn into the Ohio. This is one of the most historic places in America because it's on that point of land where the Fort Pitt Bridge has its footers that George Washington came as a 21-year-old in 1753 and said, you know, somebody ought to build a fort here, because whoever does controls the western waters, the gateway to the west. Pittsburgh began during the French and Indian War in the 1750s. It was George Washington and General Forbes that rode in and looked at the smoldering ruins of Fort Duquesne, and they said, what are we going to call this place? And General Forbes, the Scotsman, said, well, we can't call it Duquesne. That sounds way too French. Why don't we call it Pittsburgh? And that's why Pittsburgh has an H on it to this very day. It's Pittsburgh, kind of like Edinburgh, Scotland. Well, this became a hub for the Western movement.
We were cut off from the eastern seaboard because of the Appalachians. And so the people who came here had to be inventive, self-reliant. They had to make things and manufacture things. So this city did become the workshop of the world. And people all around the world today have a quality of life and live at a certain standard because of things that were created here and invented here.
Everything changed after World War II. During the war years, the factories were going day and night. 24 hours a day, you could see this orange glow bouncing off Mount Washington. One writer came here and looked at the pall of smoke over the place and said, this is hell with the lid off. It was a smoky city.
City and county leaders understood that if Pittsburgh were to transition into a post-war economy, they needed to clean up the air, clean up the water, and make that move to a more modernized economy, a more modernized place for people to live and work. There's been a long-term process that has transitioned Pittsburgh from this heavily industrialized city where people lived near where they worked to suburbs where people had to drive into work. And we needed to develop transportation systems that allow for people to do that.
The quickest and easiest way to get commuters downtown from the South Hills was to punch a hole right through Coal Hill. That's what they called Mount Washington in the early days. By boring a couple of tunnels through there and building a new bridge, you could get thousands of cars downtown in minutes.
In the 1940s, 1950s in the Pittsburgh region, there was really a desire to expand the highway system to provide access to and from the city of Pittsburgh. And this was occurring as interstate highways were being built all across the nation.
In the 40s and 50s, the interstate system didn't have a direct connection into the city of Pittsburgh, and therefore a tunnel was considered as a possible solution to allow for that connection.
During the Renaissance of the 1950s, Pittsburgh was reborn. There was urban renewal, the infrastructure of the city was improved, the water was cleaned up, the air was cleaned up. But a big part of that Renaissance was rebuilding streets and bridges and moving cars around the region more efficiently. After World War II, everybody wanted a big American car. Yeah, there were buses, but there weren't trolleys as there were in the past, and fewer people were walking to work. So tunnels were key to the Pittsburgh Renaissance. Part of the Renaissance, too, was clearing the point of all of the industrial buildup and railroad tracks that had accumulated there over 100 years. And so in 1957, just in time for the 200th anniversary of Pittsburgh in 1958, they cleared the point, made a beautiful park, and installed the fountain that we see today. Connecting that point and that fountain and that gateway to Pittsburgh was the Fort Pitt Bridge that fed into the Fort Pitt Tunnel. An amazing engineering feat.
The bid for the Fort Pitt Tunnel was $10.7 million. It took 3 years to construct the tunnels, and it involved 120 people working 6 days a week. The Fort Pitt Tunnel was originally intended to be tolled in order to finance construction and future maintenance. But the toll plan faced opposition, and it was canceled when federal funding of the project became available.
Construction on the tunnel began in 1957. Michael Baker Jr. was the designing engineer. They hired an architect named Joseph Felix Bontempo to help design the thing, which I think is really interesting because it was clear that the folks who built the tunnel understood they were part of a larger effort to rebuild and recreate Pittsburgh. And Mr. Bontempo used rose-colored granite, brushed steel lettering on the portals, and we come to the interior of the tunnel, which is made up of glazed tile, ceiling and sides, which create this atmosphere inside the tunnel where the tail lights and headlights kind of glitter over the entire surface of the tunnel. And you pop out into this newly reborn city where the Renaissance Historic District is.
The town end of the tunnels, the entrances are on different levels because it's a two-level bridge, so coming out you're on top, but going towards the airport you're on the bottom level. And therefore when you enter, you actually are going up, and you can't see the end of the tunnel when you go in.
Often tunnels just empty out onto another piece of land, but here we have tunnels that launch you over a bridge, over a river, before you get to land.
When you go through that tunnel and you see our skyline, I think you just see that connection. That's my home. The great thing about the skyline in the tunnel is because it's something unexpected. It's like this visual force.
In architecture school, we always learn about merging function and aesthetics. So it's really great to have seen the Fort Pitt Tunnel be designed in a way that it wasn't just meant for the function, but it also took into account aesthetics.
It's clear that the tunnel designers understood that they were part of something larger. They were part of this renaissance. That the tunnel was not just a utilitarian transportation system, but that it was part of this larger effort to show people what Pittsburgh was becoming.
The Fort Pitt Tunnel is a portal to Pittsburgh's heart. The very soul of the city is right there in front of you as you come across the Fort Pitt Bridge. It's where the city became a city, from an outpost in the wilderness into an industrial powerhouse. The Fort Pitt Tunnel brings us right to the heart of Pittsburgh.
Places have to grow and change. If you think the Fort Pitt Tunnel opened in 1960, the Fort Pitt Bridge opened in 1959, you begin to assess the significance of a structure if it's 50 years old or more. These now are architectural landmarks. They were really engineering triumphs to be able to tunnel through Mount Washington. And then imagine being able to create a beautiful bridge that would frame the city skyline.
And the Fort Pitt Tunnel is a big part of Pittsburgh history. Just like any other infrastructure, the Fort Pitt Tunnel has decayed over time.
There hasn't been any specific visual changes to anything at the tunnel since it was built. This rehab will be the first major visual change that the people will actually notice that has occurred. Yeah, there's around 80,000 cars that come through the Fort Pitt Tunnel every day. We're making it current. We're making it efficient based on current standards for what we need to do to protect the people that go through.
So there's definitely reason to change for safety and for structural reasons, but always understand the history behind pieces of architecture in Pittsburgh.
When you're tying a double-decker bridge into a tunnel system across a river, it's a major engineering challenge.
It has become very expensive to maintain the existing tunnel. So when we looked into the possibility of removing the tunnel ceiling, we determined that it would be much more effective to just remove it rather than to try to maintain it. One of the other benefits is we were able to improve the ventilation system.
With the tunnel renovation that's planned, we intend to remove the entire ceiling and then basically retrofit the walls where the ceiling is currently attached so that it will be a smooth, seamless tunnel.
It is anticipated that by removing the ceiling, it will improve safety, it will improve the ventilation system, as well as hopefully improve the flow of traffic that's entering the city of Pittsburgh.
It will not change the view on it, because as you exit the tunnel, there's a rectangular shape that's there. That rectangular shape will remain. The view coming out of the tunnel will not change.
Coming out of that tunnel, seeing Pittsburgh arrayed before you, well, that's a Pittsburgh experience. Although Pittsburgh is a very traditional place, people love their history, they love their quirky speech, Pittsburghese, they love their traditions, but they also embrace change. They recognize that things can't stay the same forever.
Because we are a city of hills, you can get pretty fantastic views coming into town anyway, but none of them has that surprise of coming through the tunnel. And that becomes the best view to introduce someone to Pittsburgh.
So Paul Goldberger of the New York Times wrote in 1988 that this is the only city in America with an entrance. Pittsburgh is entered with glory and drama, he says. The Willie Stargell's quote, "Last night, coming from the airport, we came through the tunnel and the city opened up its arms and I felt at home."
When I first came to Pittsburgh and drove through that tunnel, it was in the evening. The lights were just coming on. I had just driven through some green hills on the other side of Mount Washington, and then as I popped out of the tunnel, there was the whole city skyline laid before me, the lights winking, the fountain flowing nearly 100 feet in the air, the American flag still fluttering over the Fort Pitt blockhouse at the point. It was a spectacular scene.
People might not think of a bridge or a tunnel being something that's striking, maybe a hole through a mountain, but it really says something for how we can think about tunnels and bridges and that kind of infrastructure throughout the United States.
A high school student, Grace Turk, was asked to describe a memorable place in Pittsburgh and what it meant to her. She wrote this about driving through the Fort Pitt Tunnel at night. "Like a swimmer deep underwater, I am thrown from the tunnel's grip and I take in the city. The formidable glass spires piercing the night sky, towering steel structures bathed in a warm yellow glow, a magnificent reflection of an old city on the black glass of the Monongahela River below me. There is nothing like the view of Pittsburgh at night as one emerges from the Fort Pitt Tunnel."